So before we get started with today's Ancient DOS game, we're going to be taking a look at the box itself, because today's game is Star Trek Pinball. And this box, well, as you can see, it's still really shiny and sealed, supposedly. So yeah, there's a few issues I have with this box. First of all, something I should point out is that this is a 1997 game from Interplay. And Interplay was having financial issues when they put this game out. And that's going to factor in somewhat to the end result of whether or not this is originally sealed, and this is the factory seal on it, or if this has been reshrunk. See, this is something that occurs somewhat alarmingly in the industry, usually in regards to like any kind of like expos where you got random vendors selling stuff. I've actually been burned that way once before. Back in 2000, yeah, it was 2000. I bought a copy of Diablo that was sealed. Like, it looked sealed and everything, but when I opened it, is the shareware version inside. So yeah, this is part of the reason why I'm not a fan of collecting sealed games. I like complete in box is fine, but if it's sealed, you don't really know what's inside. But there are ways to try and figure out if a seal is factory original. And when I first saw this, it was kind of setting off some alarms for me. So we'll go over what it was that was bugging me about this box, and we'll open it. So the first thing I want to point out with this box is that it's actually, you can take it might be a little tricky to see, but it's actually concaved. The shrink wrap is so tight, it's like pushed down the middle of the box. Like, it's like squeezing it to death in a sense. Like, that's not common for factory shrink wrap to do that. Usually it's put on somewhat loosely, but this is super freaking tight. So that in itself is one warning sign. And I should point out that none of the things I'm going to point out conclusively prove it's been reshrunk, just that it just makes it more likely. Because that's the other thing too, is that if this was reshrunk, these sealing lines here would be extremely poorly done. But if you take a close look, they're actually really fine. So normally when you do a reshrink by hand, you get like gloppiness on the corners, and the seal itself is not very straight. These are pretty straight, so that's kind of a point in favor of it being factory original. And another thing I want to point out, and this isn't technically a point for or against factory original, there's actually, you can actually see sort of indentations where price stickers used to be. I think this one, yeah, this one you can see on the camera right here, is where a small rounded rectangle sticker was haphazardly placed. But it's actually another indentation, which is, I don't think it's going to appear on camera at all, but it's a big rounded rectangle that used to be up here. So there were two different stores trying to sell this unsuccessfully. But I think the most damning thing of all, and this is what really set my alarms off, if you take a close look at the bottom here, like a really close look at that. You see all those the sort of like spottiness and brownness and everything? That's like dirt and dust. And it's on the underside of the shrink wrap. And that stuff is everywhere. Like, at first I thought it was just, whoops, I hit the camera. I thought it was just the bottom here, but no, it's actually all around the box. It's just harder to see on the black parts. So that was what really set off my alarms as to like, maybe this was reshrunk or something. But I've done my research, and I've looked at multiple shrink-wrapped boxes of this game. They all look virtually identical. They all have the same shrink-wrap lines. They all have the dust and debris on the inside. They even have the same registration holes. The registration holes are what are used to get the air out when shrink wrapping. I don't think they're going to show up on camera because they're really tiny on this box. They're done in like columns, like staggered columns. But yeah, so they all look virtually the same. And the thing is, there's even different boxes of this. Like, you can see the technical info down here is done in a horizontal format. There's some boxes where this is actually done vertically instead. And they have the same shrink wrap issues and the same dust and debris issues. So Okay, it's time to actually open this. Because we need to know for certain if this is actually original shrink or not. And plus, I need to be able to play the game. That's kind of important. So, here we go. Single take. Taking the shrink wrap off. If I make any flubs or anything, I can't retake now. Yeah, and just pulling the shrink wrap off, all the dust came with it. Whoops. I hate when that happens. Okay, there it goes. Okay. Shrink wrap is off. Now, let's see what's inside. Well, first of all... Interesting. So... Yeah, look at this. This cardboard insert doesn't even look like it was designed for this game. Or maybe it was. Well, that's a weird way of doing it. Look at how it's, it's falling apart on me. Look at how it's supposed to be, assembled in there. That is very haphazard. Although that kind of proves that it probably... Look at that. That's how it came, folks. Anyway, so it does look like everything's here, though. Wow. That is really dusty. Ooh, boy. Look at that. I don't know how well that shows up on camera, but that is super dusty. At least we got the game inside. Come on. Look at that. Well, even the CD is covered in dust. Wow. And you can actually tell looking at it that it's only, look at that. It's not even using the full CD. I'm gonna have to clean that before I put it in my drive. But, yeah, so we got the CD. We got the manual, which is jewel case size, even though there's an... Oh, yeah, that's because some regions actually do have, like, a proper size manual, not a jewel case size manual. What else did it come with? These feel disgusting, by the way. These feel ultra dusty. So, Chekhov's Lost Missions. And what else? Reference card for installation. And reference and troubleshooting guide. Okay, so this probably is factory original, but geez, was it in terrible shape. So let's actually play the game now.
I'm impressed with your quick thinking.
Okay, so the game itself. Oh boy, where do I even begin with this? Let's start with one of the positive things I have to say about this program as a whole. They had a vision. The devs clearly had the talent and did a bunch of research and wanted to produce a really fun and visually accurate pinball program to match the level of detail and quality of real pinball machines. That's what they wanted. The reality, however, is that this was rushed. So much of this program feels like it was barely tested, barely finished, and heck, many of the visuals and audio feels like it was meant to be placeholder material instead of the material intended for the finished product. That said, though, this is going to be a fairly average length review. The program as a whole is pretty shallow, and you can experience the entire thing in about 10 minutes, especially given the level of difficulty on hand if you try to play this legit. Though, as you're probably going to notice as you watch the footage, I was playing this anything but legit once I figured something out.
We Klingons have a reputation.
Now, I thought Star Trek Pinball was released in 1997, given that all the copyrights indicate 1997, and a few websites even claim a release in 1997. But further research showed it was actually released just a month into 1998, having been developed by SCi Games and published by Interplay. And as clearly established in the title, this is a 1 to 4 player pinball game. Mostly. One of the tables we'll be looking at it later is 2 players only. It only supports SVGA graphics, which, given when this came out, there were very few computers left still lacking SVGA of any kind, though it supports both a 640x480 256 color graphics mode, as well as an 800x600 mode, with the dot matrix display in the games looking more like an actual DMD when you play at the higher resolution. In terms of audio, it's using a generic third-party driver, thus why it supports tons of devices, some of which don't really make a lot of sense for a 1998 game. As for its current release date, it's still commercial, and while it's not available on digital download sites, physical copies aren't even remotely rare, despite some sellers claiming otherwise. I found numerous copies for sale online, many sealed in box, and the prices were fairly low. A few sellers were trying to gouge, as is par for the course, but you'll typically find loose copies for between $5 and $10, and fully boxed, even sealed copies for between $15 and $20. Now, as we saw in the unboxing though, be prepared to wipe away a lot of dust if you buy it sealed, as every copy I found online was showing signs of this same kind of dust going on, at least when the photo quality was high enough to see it. Mind you, that's presuming you intend to play it even. So, when you first start up Star Trek Pinball, you get an opening sequence that feels very out of place. Definitely not like Star Trek, even though it was clearly intended to be for a Star Trek game. You then get to the main menu, which lets you choose which of the 3 included tables you want to play, which graphics mode you're going to use, or whether or not you want to quit. The table choices are To Boldly Go, Kapla, and Nemesis, which is an interesting name choice given that this program was released nearly 5 years before the Star Trek Nemesis movie. Now, I'm not really going to be talking about specific tables for the most part, but in the case of To Boldly Go, there's something about this table in particular I need to talk about right off the bat, and that's the Playfield Artwork. This is a Star Trek game intended to revolve around traveling through the galaxy, fending off hostile encounters, launching shuttlecrafts, dealing with the transporter system, making your way to alien planets. And so to give the player a sense of the final frontier, the Playfield art depicts Captain Kirk surrounded by various women from the show. Okay, I mean, I get it, Kirk was quite the go-getter, but not only does this Playfield art have nothing to do with the actual progression through the game's features, but it actually looks like it was cobbled together super quickly, as though this was never intended to be the final artwork. To be fair though, the 3D rendering itself is done really well, for the most part. The habit trails, i.e. the wireforms used to guide the ball when it's above the playfield, look very shoddy for some reason, but the rest of it looks really accurate to how a real pinball machine would look. So points for that. It's a pity it doesn't play anything like real pinball. Sorta. Okay, so the physics in this game are just bizarre. It's like a strange mix of how real physics would work, but if they were tweaked to extreme degrees. And to give an example, the ball moves really fast. It moves fast in a pinball machine too, but here it's moving even faster than that. And that's combined with really slow moving flippers. Like in real life, a pinball flipper goes from not engaged to fully engaged extremely fast, as it's done using solenoids, which are essentially just electromagnetic coils which accelerate a metal rod. Basically, if you can see the travel of a flipper in a pinball game, it's going too slow. Here in Star Trek Pinball, it takes 5 frames of gameplay at 70 frames per second to engage the flippers fully. Which, it's only 0.07 seconds, but that's still several times longer than it takes a real pinball flipper to engage. Not only does this break the realism, but because of how fast the ball's moving, you can literally press the flipper button with plenty of time to spare, only for the ball to roll off the flipper before it's done engaging. Yeah, it's like the physics are working and doing what they're supposed to do, mostly, but are still in need of serious tweaks to get them working right. But those tweaks never happened, thus again leading credence to my theory that they rushed this game out the door way before it was ready. Well, another example of this is that there are several ramps and shots on both tables which are guaranteed to send the ball down the drain without fail. Now, some people will say that real pinball machines do this too, except they actually don't. Real pins are designed to return the ball in various ways, but never straight for the drain. But because some aspects of some pins get dangerously close to doing so, That means slight misadjustments can throw this out of whack, and thus you do indeed get features throwing the ball straight for the drain. But this only due to a lack of proper adjusting or a failure in the mechanisms involved. It's not by design. But this is a digital pinball program. It doesn't have that excuse. Shooting this ramp on the Kirk table when it's not able to catch the ball is guaranteed to send the ball right down the middle. In fact, on the other single-player capable table, Kapla, shooting the middle targets also guarantees sending the ball straight down the middle, which is stupid because you're supposed to shoot those targets over the course of normal gameplay to progress through the features. But, just in case you didn't think the physics were broken enough, it's time to really break them. Observe the magically levitating ball of wonder. Yeah, so nudging's kind of broken, to put it as nicely as possible. First of all, there's no visual or audible indication when you make a nudge, so you just sort of have to assume it's working. But boy, does it really work. When you nudge a pinball machine in real life, you're creating a physical force in one direction, which is then countered by the machine in the opposite direction. Newton's third law right there. What this means for the ball on the playfield is that it will move in the opposite direction you're pushing in, very briefly, and then it will move in the direction you originally pushed in a fraction of a second following as your force is countered. Now, if the ball was perfectly centered on the playfield and motionless, a nudge would move the ball, but it would ultimately end up right back where it started, or at least very close to. Star Trek Pinball simulates the initial force of the nudge, but not the counter force. Thus, if you repeatedly nudge in the same direction, you'll repeatedly accelerate the ball more and more in that direction. Now, if there was a proper limit to your nudging in the game, you'd never be able to get away with this, and you can indeed tilt in this game if you nudge enough times. But to give you an idea of just how much nudging you have to do to trigger a tilt, you pretty much have to be nudging more than 20 times a second just to start triggering the tilt warnings. Seriously, I measured this 20 times a second. By the time you actually tilt, you've nudged anywhere between 60 and 100 times, and that's presuming you can keep up the pace, as the timer tracking this is constantly going down. So, after less than a second's passed, all traces of your having nudged will be gone as far as the game logic is concerned. Unfortunately though, this is only really useful for moving the ball sideways. Again, because of how insanely powerful the gravity is, it's very difficult to fight it. So you can easily save the ball from an out lane or the center drain if you see it coming, but it's otherwise very hard to recover the ball once it's below the flippers. Though I have done it a couple times, so it's not impossible, just really hard. I also want to quickly point out, pinballs are very bouncy in real life, but as was common with digital pinball games, and this one being no exception, the ball behaves more like a brick when it hits anything, losing most of its momentum in the process. This is especially noticeable with the flippers, but pretty much every surface just does not bounce the ball anywhere near as much as it should. Anyways, let's talk about the audio for a moment. I've mostly been keeping the CD audio off because really, it's pretty forgettable, especially since the game only comes with 3 CD audio tracks, only one of which is actually from the TV show, and the other 2 I don't recognize at all. They're probably original tunes, but I'm not certain. The one from the TV show, though, is the title theme, and it hasn't been mastered well, as it's filled with pips and pops. I was going to play back a quick fragments, just so you can hear what I mean. Now, my first thought was emulation problem, so naturally I went for a real CD player to see if those pips and pops were an emulation issue or the disc itself. And it was the disc itself. Those pips and pops are actually mastered right into the audio track, once again providing evidence of a highly rushed product. And again, same with the lack of any other music from the series. Interplay released other Star Trek games well before this one, most of which excelled in the music department. So the fact that the music was given so little attention to detail here is almost unbelievable. Actually, speaking of audio, there's something else which bugged me the moment I heard it. Listen to what you hear when a game of Kirk's Table is over. That definitely doesn't sound like Star Trek, and in fact, that almost sounds like it came from a real pinball game. In fact, beyond the clips taken from the TV show, a lot of the sounds of this program sound like they came from real pinball machines, or at the very least were inspired by real pinball machines. which would be a much better circumstance, but given how rushed this thing was, who knows. In fact, just judging by 2 features found on both of the single-player tables, I can already tell 2 of the real pinball machines which inspired these: Bram Stoker's Dracula and Twilight Zone. Bram Stoker's Dracula was a popular, albeit difficult, pinball machine from the 90s, and one of the noteworthy features it had, which has only ever been replicated in a tiny number of pins, was a special mist ball. Basically, when you triggered the mist ball, a magnet on a rail under the playfield would, seemingly by magic, pull a pinball along a straight path over the playfield. And if you could knock that pinball free from the magnet, you'd start a 2-ball multi-ball. Now, despite how rare this feature is on real pinball machines, both To Boldly Go and Qapla' have this feature. Actually, Qapla' also has thunder audio effects, which are very similar to the ones found on Dracula. Though after checking, they're not identical, just very similar. Twilight Zone, on the other hand, was an exceedingly popular game. So popular, in fact, that it's ranked number 1 on the Internet Pinball database by all the visitors of that site. I've never quite understood its popularity myself, but one of its defining features is a mini playfield raised above the regular playfield in a corner, where the ball can be sent, and then, through the use of the flipper buttons, you control magnets to swing the ball around to hit targets. Well, both tables in this game have a similar feature. The one on Qapla' is erratic, to say the least. When I saw this, I got the distinct impression that maybe the game was running too fast, but even if it was, the physics are still broken all the same. And as for the one on Kirk's table, I have no idea. To start it, you need to shoot the center shot 10 times while a mode isn't running, and quite frankly, it's nearly impossible to get the ball up there because of how insane the gravity is. So I was never able to start the mini playfield mode on that one. I also want to point out how dumb the skill shots on these tables are. On Kirk's table, you have to choose a tribble. If you get it right, you get points, which double each time you're right on every new ball. This is literally 100% luck. I tried to figure out if there was any rhyme or reason to it, but no, it's completely random. And the points you can get can be excessive if this works out on all 5 balls in a row. Thus, this feature would never fly for competitive play in a tournament. There's another Twilight Zone inspired feature on this table too, where if you shoot the ball up only part way when you're launching it, if you fail the triple guess, it'll fall back down and score particular amounts of points based on how high the ball went. What's dumb here is that there's literally no visual indication of any kind that this is even a feature. Not even on the DMD, not even on the playfield. So you'd only know about it if you hit it by accident, or read about it in the manual. As for Qapla', the skill shot here is to hit the flashing lane out of 3 possibilities. But no matter what power level you launch the ball at, it's almost guaranteed to go down the rightmost lane. I've only ever seen it once go down a different lane, and I'm pretty sure it's because the physics glitched out. There's lots of other design issues too. For starters, the gap between the flippers is way too big. On a normal pinball table, it's supposed to be about 2 ball widths where the flippers are at rest. Here it's about 3 ball widths, much wider than normal, which just makes it just that much easier to lose the ball. In terms of scoring, the bonus points on these tables are insultingly small, often only in the thousands or tens of thousands, given scoring which is supposed to hit the hundreds of millions for a good game. But even with a ton of practice, I was typically only reaching the mid-tens of millions, despite the extra ball score being put at freaking 250 million. That's not even remotely reasonable, and these tables don't really have a lot of good options for extra balls other than miraculously getting that many points. Another problem with the scoring is multi-ball. And typically, entering multi-ball in a pinball game is when the scores begin to skyrocket because of all kinds of jackpots and other features that open up. However, the multi-ball scoring in this game is abysmally bad. A typical multi-ball in this game will only score you a few million points, which you can get just from a lucky target shot without 5 balls littering the playfield. Even the super jackpots, which are already stupidly hard to get, are only worth in the tens of millions. The scoring in these games is just completely out of whack and not even remotely balanced in the slightest. And speaking of multi-ball, that's the final piece of evidence this game was rushed out the door way before it was ready. This game was released in the late 90s, and during the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, Williams Electronics, producer of numerous real-life pinball machines across the decades, was the registered trademark holder for the term multi-ball. There is no mention in any of the legal details for this program that Interplay licensed the use of the multi-ball trademark, and thus, by calling the multi-balls in their game by that name, they were violating Williams' trademark. Had this program been much better received and sold numerous more copies, I'm pretty sure Williams would have come knocking on Interplay's door with a lawsuit. Other pinball companies got around this, either by licensing the use of the multi-ball trademark, or by using different terms altogether. For instance, a common one used by Data East was Triball. Lastly, I'm going to quickly show the Nemesis Table, which is 2-player only and, well, neat idea in theory, but this just plays really, really bad. Not to mention, because of how easy it is to lose the ball, you're constantly going to be hearing... I went into this with an open mind. I had heard this was really bad, and when I saw screenshots, I wasn't convinced it could be that bad, because artistically, I've seen far worse. But no, this really is as bad as everyone says it is. But not because the talent wasn't there. It was the time which wasn't there. This feels so hastily put together and so barely tested that I'm convinced what we ended up with was an alpha build of this program with placeholders everywhere and none of the proper balancing and tweaking done to produce a proper finished product. In fact, there's one final nail in the coffin I can point out to prove how rushed this was. They left the DP prefs file generated by Deluxe Paint in one of the data folders on the CD, as many of the graphics are actually in LBM format. But yeah, Star Trek Pinball is really bad, and I don't recommend seeking it out unless you're morbidly curious or trying to make it part of your game collection. At least all it takes to get it to run in DOSBox correctly is a cycle setting of auto. I should point out though, even though it seems like the game is going like too fast or something, if I turn down the cycles to a lower fixed value, all it does is drop the frame rate without affecting the game speed, which just makes it even more unplayable. Remember, this came out when most people had high-end 486s or Pentium systems, so there's no excuse for having the game speed wrong, especially in something like this. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next week on Saturday the 25th, it'll be a filler. And I'm somewhat undecided what to cover, so if you have any suggestions, feel free to send them to adg@pixelships.com, and stay tuned because I'm sure I'll come up with something. Thanks for watching, everyone, and special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small sample of you guys.